Memoirs of Krste Misirkov, Chiflik Klementovo, Akhtirka District, Kharkov Province, from July 1913. Today marks exactly 10 months since the beginning of the Balkan War, which turned into a conflict between former allies. This time last year, I was living with my family in a summer house in Odessa at Sredna Fontana, the summer houses of the Women's Mihailovsky Monastery. During that time, I was visited several times by Macedonian students, my compatriots and fellow countrymen, among whom was Kiselinov. He, being interested in literature and primarily in publishing activities, had started some kind of Slavic publication and made every effort to get me to collaborate with him. Not only that, but in December 1912, when I was staying in Thessaloniki, I learned from my former student at the Bulgarian Gymnasium in Bitola, who was then a teacher at the Bulgarian Gymnasium in Thessaloniki, Mr. Zografov, that Kiselinov had, in advertisement sent to Macedonia for his publication Slavinsky K, declared me a contributor to his publication, even though I had no involvement with him and had already foreseen his unfortunate fate. Mr. Kiselinov had a partner in his publishing venture, a Serb, a law student, Mr. Markovic, whom Kiselinov brought to my weekend house to introduce me to him. Mr. Markovic was a complete contrast to Mr. Kiselinov. The latter was of average height, with mildly defined facial features, always excited, constantly searching for something yet unsure of what he wanted. He tried to compensate for his inability to express himself in words with exaggerated gestures. In fact, he didn't even know precisely what he wanted. He was always arguing with everyone about everything without understanding why he was so worked up. Mr. Kiselinov's mannerisms were astonishingly caricature-like. He was overly dramatic, gesticulated a lot, and laughed nervously. Overall, Mr. Kiselinov gave the impression of a pitiable person in every respect. His friends, the Macedonian students, disapproved of his publishing and literary itch, saying he discredited his fellow countrymen. Nevertheless, they tried to cover up his flaws, to influence him to abandon his plans and become more positive. However, this was a difficult endeavor, and the eccentric and miserable Mr. Kiselinov continued with his caricature-like publishing and social activities, making no effort to use his free time to study his specialty more thoroughly, which is much needed in our homeland of Macedonia. He justified himself by saying that the university administration under the Levashovsky-Gerich regime, contrary to the tradition of Novorossiysk University, withheld a significant portion of their scholarships, and for some months, Slavic scholars, among whom was Mr. Kiselinov, were left without any means of subsistence, forcing him to engage in publishing activities. Mr. Kiselinov shows no trace of manners, which is partly explained by his family background. He is the son of a poor widow from the town of Ohrid, and partly by the influence of Turkish rule and the formation of Bulgarian intelligentsia from the poorest classes, namely the rural and impoverished urban population of Macedonia. Mr. Kiselinov was an exception. Unfortunately, he could not be described as happy among his compatriots. He was a philology student, a very rare occurrence among Bulgarians. Mr. Kiselinov's specialty set him apart from other students, both Macedonians and Bulgarians, as they typically chose professions representative of their nation, known for being practical. Most were either medical students or mathematicians. The shortage of philologists among Macedonian Bulgarian students, as well as Bulgarians in general, can be attributed to the weak influence of historical philological disciplines on Bulgarian youth and the Bulgarian people overall. There isn't another Slavic nation where the knowledge and respect for national history are at such a low level as among the Bulgarians. Without understanding their national past, the Bulgarian people do not cherish it and even completely turn away from it, striving in every way to embrace the latest trends in European cultural life. There is no Slavic nation less nationalistic and more cosmopolitan than the Bulgarian people. Bulgarians sought to realize their national ideal instinctively, not consciously. They knew that Macedonia is ethnically Bulgarian, but they did not want to know about its past, nor delve into the nature of the Serbian and Greek claims to Macedonia and the persistence with which these nations justified their claims. The Bulgarian school poorly fostered the national sentiment, and the Bulgarian intelligentsia was entirely immersed in partisan disputes, leaving the protection of Bulgarian national interests in Macedonia to the Macedonians themselves. The latter astonishingly self-sacrificed, but led the fight for national interests in an extremely one-sided manner. The Chetnik movement and church school activities were the only tools of the national struggle. Bulgarian and Macedonian activists focused all their attention on fighting the Turks and waged that fight with extreme persistence over decades, fostering in the people the notion that the Turk was the sole enemy of the Bulgarian nation. The Serbs, Greeks, and Romanians were not of interest to the Bulgarians, and the Bulgarian people were educated either to underestimate them or to remain indifferent toward their other neighbors, except for the Turks. Not concerning itself with its own past or its neighbors, except for the Turks, the Bulgarian people, during the 35 years following the Treaty of Berlin, dedicated themselves to practical material cultural work, understanding their historical national mission exclusively as the readiness to die in the struggle against the sole enemy, the Turks, in order to achieve the national ideal. It seems that Bulgarian practicality had forsaken Mr. Kisilinov, who chose the faculty of history and philology as his specialty. Unfortunately, this conclusion proved to be premature, because when selecting his specialty, Mr. Kisilinov was generally interested in literature, Western European literatures, and Russian literature, whose works he was not very familiar with. However, he was not at all interested in the historical philological data that might apply to Bulgarian and Macedonian national history. In short, Mr. Kisilinov set a poor example of national educational influence on the Bulgarian youth from the Bulgarian high school in Macedonia. I would hardly deserve criticism for being biased if I say that even in the Bulgarian kingdom, the influence of the high school is not encouraging. July 6, 1913. Mr. Markovic, a Serbian law student and a colleague of Mr. Kisilinov at the publication Slavinsky K, was quite different from him. Markovic was tall, with a pockmarked, elongated face and prominent cheekbones. He moved slowly and was thoughtful. When he visited us, he apologized for the intrusion without prior introduction and courteously kissed my wife's hand upon arrival and before leaving. Together with Kisilinov, he requested my participation in Slavinsky K. I thanked them for the invitation, but declined due to a lack of free time. Mr. Markovic had a completely different understanding of his role in the magazine compared to Mr. Kisilinov. While Kisilinov focused only on the material aspect and thought casually about the publication's practical significance, Markovic aimed to ensure that the publication did not pose a threat to Serbia's interests and, if possible, used it to benefit the Serbian people. Mr. Markovic either wrote or reviewed the introductory articles himself, penning numerous pieces and comments on Bosnia and Herzegovina and other Serbo-Croatian regions. The cover illustration depicting Austria on crutches threatening tiny Serbia was also evidently suggested by Mr. Markovic. Thus, it is clear that the Bulgarian literary endeavor of Mr.
If you enjoyed this book preview, click on the link below to Amazon and consider buying the softcover book. Thank you.